Hello, and welcome to the latest Hub webinar designed to help you get smarter with your event marketing. I'm Rami Merriman, the Marketing Director at Hub, and I'll be your moderator today. Our goal is to provide you with valuable information that you can use when creating your next event that will help make your life easier, save you time, and get your event marketed faster. I'm super excited about our presenter today. We've got Nick Borelli in the house. Nick is a popular speaker and in-demand marketing consultant who has been ranked as the second most influential event prof on social media. With over 20 years in the events industry and a decade as a marketing educator, Nick is one of the most knowledgeable marketers in events. Before I hand it over, a few housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar will be recorded, and both the recording and slides will be made available within a couple days. You'll all be sent out an email with a link. And then also, all participants will be muted during the call. So if you have any questions, we'd love to do a Q&A. Go ahead and submit them via the questions box in the GoToWebinar app, and then we'll answer as many as possible at the end of the session. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Nick.
Okay, I'm really excited to talk to everybody today. I've had the opportunity to experience Hub a number of times, and any kind of way I can collaborate with them, and I've been really excited to find a way, and we are today. So one area that I'm really passionate about, more than anything else really when it comes to events, is marketing in the most human way possible. This is, I think, with all of the new developments in technology associated with marketing, it's very easy to strip away humanity and not really connect with people in the way that you would if they were in front of you. The trick of it is to do that in a way that scales and gains trust at a faster pace than you would by just creating a great event and then getting 1 to 2% more attendees over the years, which isn't exciting. So we're going to talk about ways to market more in a more human way and in a way that actually scales to gain your goals. So first, really get out of the way is what I do. I'm a marketing consultant. I either come in to fix small problems or big problems. At the last bit there, I'm actually more interested to talk about anytime anyone's ever interested is I'm really passionate about comic books, and I've done podcasts on comic books, and I'm like immersed in that world, which allows me to write off a lot of attendance of going to comic book conferences, Comic Cons, and I'll use one as an example later on. So I think that all event producers would gain a lot of insight by spending time as an attendee, and this is something that I make decisions on which tickets I'm going to buy, just like any attendee does in that realm, and it allows me to think more like someone who is not in the world of producing, but in the world of just being a person that wants to consume things. So to that point, this is a thing that I repeat ad nauseum, and that is events are epicenter of communities, plural. There are multiple communities which have peaks and troughs throughout their year. They would exist without your event, these communities. However, the communities are really the center of everything that is exciting about the community. And I've had an opportunity with many different clients to see how communities behave and interact with events. One of the ways I looked at for the last year was I had access to an app called AllCal, which allowed me to peek in at some communities having conversations about events. And I actually got to check out the back and forth communications between attendees of RuPaul's Drag Con, which was an underserved community when it came to events. And this event really brought a community that's been existing for decades to a new level. And it was just exciting to see kind of this ecosystem just flourish in the midst of a live event, and to see, just remind myself just what's possible. So because events are epicenters of communities, you have to understand who makes up these communities. Now, there's two main buckets I really want to talk about to set the record straight, because there's a lot of ambiguity around this. And one is what is been called tribes, mostly as defined by Seth Godin in his book Tribes. In addition to other works that he's done, he references this. And really, a tribe is the idea of something that you subscribe to. You see yourself as that thing. An association is a great example of that. An association member, they define themselves partially by that. So like, for instance, I am a member of PCMA. I'm a member of an organization called ILEA, and that has a structure. There is leadership. There's a hierarchy. There are rules, and you can, opt into being in that tribe, in that association, if you will. A persona is something that actually means something to the person who is either selling something, be it a buyer persona when it comes to, for instance, retail. Retail is really big into persona work, or events when it comes to attendee personas. Now, you define this as the person who puts on the event or creates the product. It means something to you, and it's about buying behaviors. It's not about something that that person themselves knows about, knows they're in, or subscribes to, but I'll explain like more of what makes up a persona, but it is something you define as someone selling things, not as something that someone feels they're in. Why I talk about persona marketing really comes down to this. I believe most people right now are becoming more and more blind and deaf to marketing, period, and certainly marketing that is not aimed directly at them. And there's really less and less marketing going that direction. There's no need to make blanket statements that appeals to everyone anymore. The targeting available on channels for marketing has never been this specific over time. I mean, I buy a lot of ads online, and I will tell you that the targeting, I mean, they're actually reducing the targeting to some extent because it's been pervasive to the degree of, really messing with political structures. It's that pervasive. And the idea of having one statement that appeals to everyone is 20th century marketing, and it is something that doesn't really feel human because it's too broad. When I speak, really the first thing I want to know is who's attending. It makes a big difference. When I write, I want to know who I'm writing to. The audience makes all the difference in the world. And if I have an event, like for instance, I have one coming up where there's going to be hoteliers and event producers and some other people in the event ecosystem. It's while it's all event specific, it's not just producers. So I have to make it, broad enough to appeal to both groups. However, I will tell you, if I were able to split that audience, and I knew that I was speaking in this instance just to one side of the room versus the other, the content would be pure. It would resonate more, as would any kind of marketing message you're doing or advertising. So the idea is know the people better and connect with them deeper. Now, what personas are, or I think something that has been maybe mystified for some, and I'm trying to do some work here today to be able to demystify that for you. They aren't anything really that challenging, and they don't have to be that deep. I believe you should start with something first, and then as you lean into this more, invest more time into understanding who you're talking to, who you're trying to sell tickets to, the more you can add to this and make them richer and more powerful. But I believe there's really no excuse not to have them at all. So let's make it really, really simple to begin with. What you want to do is you want to be able to understand that there are different types of communities made up of different types of people who have a reason to attend your event. Then what you do is you create a fictional avatar who represents the behaviors of those people. You paint a picture. You create. It can be really fun, frankly, to be able to assign some sort of attributes to these people that you might think are really like broad and cold, which ends up being more of the demographic information, which will come in a minute, and they might be a little bit more of the color and a little bit more playful, which ends up coming into the more psychographic information, which again I'll get into soon after this. And then what you do is you kind of have someone you're talking to. before we started this, I said that just to show you a little bit of vulnerability and realism, I have much easier, frankly, for me to talk to a group of 1,000 people than it is to talk to my computer screen right now. It's so much easier. Once I know who I'm talking to, once I can see who I'm talking to, boy, does that make a difference. And same thing when I'm writing copy. If I know the type of person, I ended up really knowing somebody who's in one of these groups. I'm actually just speaking to them. And they represent as basically an avatar this whole group of people, which is their segment of the audience, which is a different community. So to give you an example, like these are just ones I just made up for the heck of it, because who doesn't like an alliteration? It doesn't have to be alliterations. It could be anything you want. Like I'm not trying to put too many rules on this. But for instance, at your event, there will be someone who attends this, and a whole group of people who are the veterans, and they've seen it all, they've done it all. They don't consume your presentations like they used to. Maybe they buy tickets, but they just tell everybody, I come to it, but I don't really go to as many sessions as I used to. And you know what? You'll lose them eventually through attrition. Something else will come up in their life, and they just won't be as important because they're going out of habit, and they're going under the false sense that they know everything. That's a persona. And there's a way, and first off, people like that in your life, I'm assuming, right? I can cop to some of those things that I have to fight against because it's pretty natural the more you go to conferences. Once you understand, okay, these people are in attendance, and you need to be able to attract them to come and then provide an experience for them that speaks to these people's feelings in a way that the next one, which I'm just for some reason calling Climbing Carl. So this is somebody that's been in the industry just for maybe 4 or 5 years, and whatever industry this may be, and they decided they have somewhere they want to go. They want to end up in the C-suite, so they're climbing the social ladder in order to meet as many people as they can, be the right people, get the right tidbits of knowledge, and they're in the midst of, they don't believe they know it all, and they believe that they could get much higher. So there's obviously ways you speak to them differently than the veteran. Then there's a hyper planner, or someone who's just there to fill their Rolodex full of new names to meet, because the only thing they really care about is the networking, and the content that you provide at your conference potentially or your event isn't really as necessary to them. And then, of course, most ecosystems have someone who is just there because they have something to sell to the attendees. Usually, sometimes there's barriers to entrance, but they'll always make their way in there. Trust me, I'm one of them. And they're looking to make a sale while they're there, so to speak. So they're the B2B people. So these are different goals that they have when attending your event. And if you were to try to write a sentence, a tweet, a blog post, an email that speaks to all of them simultaneously, it's going to be really, really watered down, really boring. It's going to be facts. It's not going to have any flavor to it because they just want very different things. So I'll explain how you split that in a second. Coming up with those personas, if it's not as obvious for you who these groups are, and there's a little bit of intimidation behind creating them, the simple answer is poll your existing attendees. You want to be able to mine from the people that are already and have already experienced what you have in order to use them as a sample to start building out these personas. And then when you put on the event after you've done some marketing for this based on the persona information that you have based on previous attendees, you keep in mind that you're auditing, and these are living personas that they can fluctuate. You can add to them, you could take them away. They're just a useful tool. Then in the midst of your event, you might be able to have additional data points that could enhance them in order to refine. Really, frankly, you're going to always be refining these. The polls that you ask the previous attendees, you're going to break it into 3 different areas. The first one is demographic information. Now, you may already have this. When they sign up, there might be information that is, their age, gender, where they live, and those things are obviously informing a little bit of where you put your money as far as, let's say, advertising. One platform might skew older, one platform might skew younger, more female, more male. You might be able to get certain AdWord based on, let's say, zip codes. So you invest a little bit more here. These are the colder information that's been fairly available to traditional media outlets like television, radio, print advertising, where you can dedicate where these are consumed. The next is kind of the more exciting part of it, a little bit more art than science, and that is psychographic information. So this is the makeup of people and how they behave along the lines of really who you believe your core person is within each profile. So you want to look for things that will enhance your ability to communicate and resonate. So for instance, if you notice that people in this group tend to, I don't know, sign up earlier, then you want to be able to have information that is more about because they're psychographically, you see that these are people that are planners that like to get things out of the way as quick as possible. Then you might want to do early bird emails dedicated to this group, or if you happen to notice that they're younger and they're also in the demographic information, but also lighter in the way that they communicate and are using less formalized modes of communication, you might be able to have more gifts in the emails that are sent to this demographic. So there's lots of opportunities to really have a deeper understanding of the behaviors of the people in these personas, and then basically give them what they want and behave like they behave. And then the last one, which I think is always really important, is the conversion variables. And these are the things that pushed them in one direction over the other in order for them to actually sign up. So the first bit with the demographic data, you want to make sure that the demographic questions that you ask are actually actionable. I think a lot of times I see too many questions asked in areas dedicated to demographics that there actually is no way to pivot left or right in any marketing sense, or even any sense of programming the event. So a lot of questions, look, if you don't know what you would do with, for instance, knowing someone's race, then how important is it, right? It's probably, as far as some of these really top level demographic questions, not that valuable. I mean, I hate to say it, but they're really, there's so much deeper information that you have to how actually people behave. And there's just on the big end of the spectrum, there's really not a lot of behaviors that are genial that you can use, because people are not monoliths. They're a little bit more nuanced than simply a 50-year-old might be extremely tech savvy, potentially much more tech savvy than I am, and yet if you decide, oh well, geez, anyone over 50, and we de-stress the technology end of it, I'm going to tell you that there's better things out there, which is the psychographic information, to be able to skew personas one way or the other. So this is the area that, I think I have the most interest in as someone who gets the most out of this, specifically when it comes to event marketing, where it's more about deeper connections and emotions, and it's not simply just selling a widget. When it comes to experiences, it's much more important to go after how people experience life and present your event in that same manner. So the questions I ask in poll usually are about voice preference, because at the end of the day, most of what I put out in the world for marketing has to be written and then read in a certain way that is in a voice for it to resonate. And knowing that, is this more preferable to you, basically formal or less formal, or industry insider words versus, a very broad terminology. These are the kind of things, if you have a couple questions like this in your polling of existing attendees, will allow you to determine if they want to be communicated like this more so moving forward, and others like them. And I really like questions like favorite television shows and movies and books and things like that, because again, if you know someone who also likes that, it cuts through the noise and it allows you to have a better understanding of some lighter modes of communication, or frankly, some inclusion of imagery that already pulls on emotions that they have attached to certain intellectual properties. Like, you have a lot of advantages of knowing people deeper. if someone likes this show, that they're likely to like this show and like that show and probably like experiences like this, and then you're off to the races. So you'd be surprised. Those type of questions, which might seem really far out, especially you're producing a conference for a bunch of dentists, and you ask them what their favorite television show, how is that relevant? Well, it's one additional data point. It's not the end all be all. You don't base your marketing plan off of that. But I will tell you that it does help you understand a little bit more so about how they consume content, what their preferences are, and if there's any kind of trends that you can see pop up. And the third one is value questions. What do they value in life? Do they value this versus that? What's more important to them, this or that? Those type of binary things, especially if they are done where, eventually at the end of the binary, you use the same ones over and over again, so you can get a real hierarchy of their needs based on values, allows you to align the values of your event more so with the values of the different personas. Conversion variables, what I mean by this is, what closed the deal? So straight up, why did you attend the event? And that will really be one of the top line items of a persona. And you also want to know the decisions that they didn't make. If it was between this or something else. It's really great to know the other events that are on the top of their mind, because it allows you to look out in the world and see the types of things that are also influencing them, that are similar to what they are into, in order to see if there's traction there, ways that you can take and adapt, which is a big part of my life as someone who is, attends a lot of conferences for inspiration. There's a book called Steal Like an Artist that is an exceptional book about learning and paying attention, absorbing, and then putting things out into the world that are a unique interpretation of that, and really understanding like what your attendees are also consuming in specifically events, as well as just their regular life. It really informs you where their head is, and also where you can potentially lose them if you're not paying attention to what else is out there. And then just some brass tack stuff, what's important to them the most, because you'll find from personas, these will the hierarchy of this will be wildly different. So for some people, it's about value purchasing. For other people, it's about showing off that they're somewhere because they're trend setting. I'll give you some sample personas that show you this hierarchy later, but actually, this is a great example. If you do a little research in psychographic segmentation, there's a number of schools of thought. This is kind of a classic one, VALS, and that's values, attitudes, and lifestyles. And these are in personas in a box, basically. And I don't generally tell people to spend too much time looking at already created personas, simply because they just aren't relevant. What's relevant are the personas that mean something to your event. However, there are sort of core behaviors associated with really broad groupings of humanity, and these are a few, but at least they tell you some of the words that you should be looking for that might go together with other words when you're putting together personas. So you might see groupings of words like this associated with the personas that you create that are a little bit maybe more meaningful to both experience sales as well as your specific audience. And then something I do, which I admit has a creepy tonality to it, but it is what it is, and that is everything about our lives we absolutely put on the internet. I mean, I'm sure I'm the worst offender. I live firmly on the grid, and when you find out some people who you believe are like, man, this is it. When I close my eyes and I think about this type of attendee, I'm really just picturing this person I really know named Sam, or I put together all this information and this person keeps cropping up, which is the segue into what we're talking about next. And I just want to know more about them, because I bet what they like is what this whole group likes, what this whole persona likes. And if you start looking specifically on social media, where again we share pretty much everything, and this is why this exists. I mean, you pay most people that are Facebook users and not someone who advertises with it, like I am both, but most people spend exactly $0 each year annually to have a Facebook profile, and yet spend more time with that than almost anything else in their lives. And that's because you're the product. You're not the consumer, and really the product isn't so much you, but it is these data points that you share with the world that are served up to people who advertise on Facebook so they can aim things at you more directly in order to have a higher closing rate. Now, this type of information you can also reverse engineer and use to add a little bit of flavor and understanding and deeper understanding of who you're trying to really get in front of as far as your personas. So LinkedIn and Facebook are really great for that because they show you both business and in life the things that they're connected to and might be more interested in. And you find out, boy, it seems like this age group, based on these psychometrics, they're really into food, like a lot, like they're, and then once you realize that, well, maybe if we do some, good old testing and measuring, and the next email segmentation aimed at that group, we end up in the hierarchy of things that we offer at this event, we move food up or we underline it more, right? And in that case, what you find is, oh boy, that had a positive effect on conversion rate. And you actually, like all good tests and measures, you do that again and you see if it sticks. So that's the advantage of using and understanding who the personas are that attend your event. Actually, I had a conversation earlier this morning about this idea, and it really I'm of two minds about this. Anytime I create a negative persona, and it's just a decision usually the clients have to make on certain ends of it. Once you give all of your objections and those who object to your event, so if it's an association, maybe it's members who never attend, or it's people that you can't convert to be members, or whatever it is, when you start looking at the people who left, the people who didn't, it should be at your event but don't, you have a decision to make. You can either look at these groups and say, all right, how do we overcome these objections and speak to, or dedicate a certain amount of marketing to overcoming these objections and putting that out there first, so they are more likely to want to attend. Or you say, these are the living embodiments of the types of people who should not be at our event, which is a different kind of a negative persona, but it's still in this bucket. Then you say, when you see those triggers, you just ignore that group, because you can't be all things to all people. So there's different types of personas that you would then create. Be the personifications of people who basically say no. I was trying to think of when I was, I think the only one I went against on the alliteration was yes Andy, mostly because I'm an improv guy and this is yes and I think this is just the person who's the opposite of a planner, somebody who just improvs their way through life. I don't know, inside joke for me maybe. But anyways, knowing who those negative personas are really makes a difference, and knowing who your personas are make a difference. And then what it allows you to finally do is engage differently with the target consumers. You either, for instance, in social media, what you do is you have your social media calendar, your content calendar of when you're going to release pieces of content, and you dedicate a portion of your content to each one of the personas, and you weigh them differently depending on the platform, because your platform demographics and maybe even some psychographics of your typical users of that platform, and then you see where it aligns the most percentage-wise with the persona that you're trying to attract. And let's say, for instance, this one persona that you're working on skews between maybe 25 and 40, a little bit more female than male. And then you're like, well, geez, I think that seems like it also lines up pretty well with the demographics of Instagram. So I'm gonna weigh the amount of content that I do and maybe do, if I had 4 different personas I was trying to go after, I might do, instead of 25, 25, 25, I'm going to do maybe 40% on the ones dedicated to, that are more aligned with Instagram on Instagram, and then I'll break up the remaining percentages on the other 3. So it doesn't have to be even. You should weigh things accordingly with where, basically fish where the fish are. But when it comes to email segmentation, when you have a piece of content that basically leads people to signing up to your email list, you want to be able to skew and have variations of it. So when it says join, sign up here, be it a white paper, a webinar, a tweet, if that content is geared towards one persona, the email that they sign up to there is segmented specifically to that persona. Therefore, if you liked that webinar, you're likely built like this, which means we'll start pushing more content towards you that way through this email. Same thing goes with your advertising. Everything that leads back to your web page should really be split and have a variation. Instead of sending everybody to your .com, have everybody go to a variation of your landing page that is dedicated to that persona with a hierarchy of the things that they want to see the most at the top, or not just necessarily at the top, but more of that, whatever it is, but just weigh it accordingly so it resonates more so with that group. So the big difference between event marketing with personas and product marketing is you're also creating an experience. And granted, products are selling products, and there's variations of products, for sure, but not in the same degree of an experience. Experiences can be taken in many different ways. And to give you an example, of ways that you take these personas and then you have them impact the programming of an event. Because again, if you talk to them differently to get them to buy a ticket, you should also program differently in order so you're not doing a bait and switch. So your event itself should also have tracks that are speaking more to those personas than just again trying to speak to all attendees as if they're one. It didn't work for your marketing, and it wouldn't work for your experience. Here's a couple examples of personas that were used last year with Experience at the E4 conference. There was more than this, but here's a couple of them, and it just gives you an idea of the type of person that you may be. And when you click on that, it gives you a path. You don't have to take that path exactly, just like you don't have to take a marketing track or a sales track or entrepreneurial track, or whatever the equivalent is for the event that you produce. These are guides that, look, most events over program, because a lot of times we just want to make sure everyone is, has a great experience. So we, basically throw a million experiences and see what sticks. In this way, it kind of is a signpost to say, look, if you're like this kind of person, what you should do is you probably would enjoy this presentation at 9 o'clock and this one at 10:30 and so on, because, we've thoughtfully created this event with the types of people that we believe are here. And it really is a guidepost to be able to plan an event across those same lines. If you're creating marketing dedicated to this, you should create an event that also speaks to that. So I want to show you how to then take that information and really build your event attendance up in more than a couple percentage points each year. I really honestly believe that if you can grow an event every single year by just putting on a great event, but not dramatically, unless you have some crazy tipping point that just is luck or just the confluence of just really, really amazing things. Usually speaking, I think an exceptional event breeds, depending on the how busy the marketplace is, 4 or 5% each year, which if that's all you want to do because, those are your goals, great. I think that you should just focus on producing a great event. I was recently brought in to look at an event to help with the marketing, and I looked at all the numbers beforehand, and what jumped out at me is they had a 15% retention rate, and I was like, well, your problem isn't marketing in as much as you have a bad event, which definitely lost me the sale. But sometimes that's what's really important is frankly just producing a great event. But beyond that, if you have bigger goals, if you really want to grow this event to be as big as it could be and affect as many lives as you can, then you need to be able to really analyze of where you can grow the fastest. And I'm going to tell you what, it is not buying more ads, and it is not marketing more frequently. So I'll explain. Really, really straightforward, simple explanation of how marketing leads to sales. This is probably trite to some, but I'm still going to show you. Awareness is the game that most people play in the social media realm, where it's just we post and we post and we post, and then eventually okay, fine, I know who you are now. Consideration means you don't hate the things that you see. Preference means, look, if I ever have the money and the need, you're someone that'll be in my list. And if you never have the money or the need, but you've really gained a lot of trust, then they're loyal to you. They would recommend you, but they're not going to purchase from you. Or if you get them from the preference point, this is what I like, and if I'm ever in that need, and then they are in that need, then you have a sale. The best people in the world are the people who buy from you and also tell other people to buy from you, and that's people who recommend from you and then lead to more sales. So that's the basically the line in which all sales works. The problem of it is that it requires a lot of time. Especially if it's year one and you have to, if I go back to this, if I go, okay, how many tweets is you have 3 or 4 months to your first event, and you've built up no awareness, not a sufficient amount of awareness, how do you sell tickets? How do you sell a lot of tickets? I had this event that was looking at selling 100,000 tickets to motorcyclists, and it was the first year. So I was like, well, first you need to build your personas, because there are very different types of personas of people who are into motorcycles. But I'm going to tell you, knowing them deeper still requires a fair amount of time in order to build up trust. So if you're interested, and if, I think most people are usually interested to see how this is done, how you can get somewhere faster, how you can build up, and because I believe that, there's a direct relationship between time and trust. However, trust can be earned by others, and this is what the next segment of this is going to be talked about. We're going to talk about how we can leverage other people's trust in order to get to sales faster. So to give you one of my favorite examples, as I started earlier off with this, I'm a big fan of comic books and attending comic book conventions. This New York Comic Con, there's been a number of comic book conventions that have taken place in New York over the last, call it 30 to 40 years. Some have come and gone. Reed Exhibitions has a side, an imprint called Reed Pop, and in 2006 they started with right around 32,000 attendees, and last year they had 200,000 paying attendees. I mean, they had a lot more human beings over the course of 4 days in that building, because there's a lot of exhibition taking place. But they had 200,000 paying attendees. Now that's not buying more ads. That's not, well, they were tweeting 5 times a week and then they went to 12. Like that. That's not how you grow that fast. There's a few tipping points associated with that. Mostly, I will say the biggest ones, there's probably 2 huge ones. One is they had a really good understanding of who their attendees were and ways to turn them on, and they brought their exhibitors into that, and they made sure their exhibitors understood that as well. Also, 2008 and up, you start to see the proliferation of smartphones and the taking of photos everywhere. That's a huge part of it as well. And then what took place is there's all these other communities that were not being served by what were really called comic shows. And I attended them in the 90s and early 2000s, where it was fat white guys with beards, and I can say that because I'm one of them, with boxes of old dusty books selling to other people just like them, right? A complete lack of diversity. The only emails that were being sent out were to speak to that problem, to solve that problem, and that was it. And then what happened is, both from a demand and from a standpoint of waking up to the demand, other communities were activated and brought into what is now known as, popular comic book conventions, which is a different animal completely, because it's more of a pop culture celebration. So they broadened their horizons. They attracted different groups. They provided parallel programming that was dedicated to just gamers. I don't dress up when I go to comic book conventions. I'm going to one this weekend. I don't dress up. Not my thing. I don't know anything about Japanese animation. I've got a 4-year-old, so I don't have time to play video games, and he's not into them yet. So I don't play video games. I go for a couple different reasons. I used to go because I just went to buy a lot of books, Now I'll go this weekend with my son because he wants to see this cool stuff that's happening, right? So I'm either in one of those two personas, depending if I'm by myself or with my son, but the other ones mean nothing to me. But I will tell you, those other people don't care about reading, like spending 8 hours looking at a box of comic books. I want to tell you, that's very fulfilling to me, and it bores the heck out of my wife, but it's a real thing. And you can't have a message that reaches both of those people. So you have to split them along personas. But if you really want to gain traction, you engage with influencers. Now, this is probably the hottest topic when it comes to event marketing in 2018. It was predicted in almost every organization that speaks to marketing needs for the events industry. I mean, I didn't see one of them that didn't mention influencer marketing in their reports for trends. I will say that influencer marketing is something that has been around for a long time in different industries. I mean, it is the engine that moves fashion, for instance. But when it came to event marketing, it's very underutilized. It just requires a level of sophistication, understanding, and collaboration that we really haven't had before, based on either lack of technology or the platforms for the influencers weren't as readily accessible. So now they are. When you combined these personas with these influencers, and what's even more interesting and potentially less expensive and more impactful, micro influencers, which are influencers on the really niche level that only speak to just the types of people that you want to go after. So harder to find, but actually more trusted because they are more niche. Not only trusted into the people that they speak to, but still pretty valuable. And that's a drawing of me. So these micro influencers, when you combined them or influencers, depending on your goals, when you combine them with your personas, what you find out is that you have a representation of who your attendees are and someone who they actually already have trust in, who has built up over time credibility. If you bring them into the fold of the goals of your events, all of a sudden your trust versus speed moves much faster. Now, when I speak about influence, what I'm speaking to really is an understanding of they have to be able to have a sufficient reach. They have to be relevant to your needs, and they have to resonate, basically meaning credibility and trust. If you can have all three of those things, you are, as you know, I'm defining here, influential. Finding them seems sometimes like alchemy. There is some science involved. I believe the science is poorer than the alchemy currently. As someone who has actually been on both sides of this, I've been activated as an influencer, as well as more frequently written strategies that take in influencers. I've seen both sides of it, and I can tell you that there's software out there that can just, through algorithms, say, okay, these people are using these words and they have this many followers, therefore they're influencers. I'm going to tell you that that's pretty weak. That with a little bit more thumb on the pulse of the communities that you serve, you'll actually spend less money by finding people who people actually believe in more frequently, and they'll be more valuable to you than it would be just by somebody has a large amount of vanity metrics and has used words. I mean, really, it's the pure software sides of it isn't that powerful, but there's other software you can use that sort of augment your process of finding the right influencers. One I use is called BuzzSumo. It's pretty great because it shows you the pieces of content that are out there in the world that are people within the certain keywords that you're trying to attract are sharing the most online, so you can determine, okay, this is the type of information that people are talking about the most frequently. Who authored that? Because oftentimes if they're influential that way, there's somebody you could bring into the fold. There are other engagement metrics which, have some dubiousness to them. I will grant you things like clout and cred, that are just sort of surface level engagement numbers. But at least you can see that there's some, red flags if they're really, really low engagement, meaning they have 100,000 followers, but when they tweet, no one ever likes or comments or retweets it. That's a problem. That's not somebody you want to go after. You want to go after someone with resonance. I find a little bit of research goes a long way, looking on LinkedIn to see, if they built their career in a way that makes sense and is similar to the ways that the attendees can relate to the relevant hashtags that they use. And just this is like a lot of different and people really prolific writers are oftentimes exciting people that people listen to because they have to be. And then the thing that really is the secret sauce for me is just asking people central to my event, who would you want to see at your booth? Who would you want to see speaker, in the audience that you would speak to? Who'd be your ideal person to be in front of? Asking the people that are really around your event who the most important people to their world are, likely are also the most important people to your attendees. It's often, it should be at least one ecosystem. So once you've determined who these influencers are, you want to go through and make sure that they're on your team. So, okay, you've identified them as somebody that has trust. That trust is worth something, obviously, or you could spend the time. Again, this is a shortcut to time, and any shortcuts to time are basically a straight lines to money. So it's all in life, in marketing and sales. It's all about money and time and their relation to each other. In this instance, if you want them to do the work for you, you have to compensate them in some way. That scares a lot of people off initially. Most people are like, I don't have a budget for this. I'm going to tell you, depending on what your goals are, if you've got lofty goals, if you're trying to sell 100,000 tickets, you have to spend a fair amount of money to get people there. So you better have a budget. But if you're looking to, increase attendance by 100 attendees or something to that, it seems pretty manageable. Finding people that could be part of your team with influence and giving them free tickets and just saying, hey, I'll give you a free ticket to this conference. I just need you to do the following for me. Can you, let's collaborate on a blog post. Let's do an interview on Facebook Live. Let's do some tweets about it. Let's something that, we can just, that's pretty simple for them to do, but it utilizes the trust that they've earned and, makes it so people understand and use those channels towards your ends. If you want to go a little bit deeper than that, you can use an affiliate program, something like HubSpot, that allows you to track the links that they put out, so you can determine if that person is fulfilling their end of it, if they actually have the influence, and then you can, double down on them or use them again. You could do it in a project with them where you could work on something collaborative. I often try to use influencers as ambassadors of events and give them a role at the event themselves, which then makes the compensation a little bit easier because they're fulfilling something that I would probably had to spend money on anyway. Or if you believe that they're really somebody that's valuable to you and specifically valuable enough that you want to keep them from competing events, because you're going to start aligning yourself with them, you might want to have them on retainer so you have some kind of ongoing deal with them. The biggest challenge that I see when it comes to influence marketing, and the reason that I see that there's more bad examples of how this has failed companies than the ones that you see. If it runs well, you kind of don't see it. If it runs poorly, people talk about influencer marketing more. I'm thinking of you, Fire Festival. You want to bring those people in, and you want to not just say, here's $100, tweet about this event 5 times. You want to realize that these are taste makers, so let them make some taste. Let them represent those personas that you've worked on and say, look, I like this kind of stuff. Therefore, based on your process of finding me, these people will also like it too. So more programming like this, less like that, talk more like this. I wouldn't say it that way, and really listen to them. When it comes to what they're putting out in the world, I'm going to tell you that there's a reason that people trust them and believe in them, and it's because their voice is unique, and telling them what to say exactly, you want them to ultimately lead people to your event, but having them do it in their way, even if it doesn't feel on brand for you, it's on brand for them. And as soon as they start talking in a way that doesn't sound like them, it undercuts the whole value of them. So let them be themselves. And then the last bit is important, especially for long-term goals, and that's to monitor. There's two different ways to monitor. You want to monitor for impact, to determine if the influencer that you brought in to help you sell more tickets is of value to your event, and then you want to either do it again or just audit your whole system for finding those types of people. The other thing you want to audit them on is you want to make sure that while it is authentically them, it still doesn't mess with the core beliefs and values of your business. I'm going to tell you that this happens in other industries that use influencers more frequently. YouTube is a great example of that. Some YouTube stars that have made some big deals with companies as large as Disney have not been on brand with Disney, and it's caused problems. So you really want to understand what you're getting into. I think of I'm trying to think of a good example. A comedian, boy, my brain's going dead here. I don't know. It was a Geico duck. I could picture him. I don't know. Anyways, it didn't jive. He was any kind of shock comedian who also does the voice of a mascot of a company. Likely, eventually, you're not gonna see eye to eye on things. So, how they build that up, you have to understand like how they're built and things. And if you guys would be friends at a dinner party, that might be fine. But if you're like, boy, this person is crass and just doesn't really fit us, but I really want their audience, don't draw that line. It still has to be able to cohesively fit together. And oftentimes when it comes to like event marketing and specifically corporate event marketing, most people aren't really out there that far out, right? Like they have to make a living too. So like it's not as high risk as some influencer deals are. Now, when I speak on all of this stuff, specifically when I was talking about the authenticity end of it, I really I believe in this. Also, there is gray-ish currently legal precedents set, but I think you should be ahead of the curve. Similar to like how opting into emails, a lot of people are freaking out right now, and I'm like, I've basically been doing that that style of opt-in since the beginning, so I'm not sweating it. Similar to when it comes to transparency of influencers. There's conventions that are being kind of tested. It's kind of the Wild West when it comes to social media influencers right now, whether what people say this is the law or that. There really is all kinds of precedent this way or that way. But best should just be transparent. If someone is on your team, if there's an exchange, monetary exchange or of some sort happening, make sure that they tell people that is the case. The FCC has at times come after people for what seems like a recommendation for something that was not happening through a monetary exchange, or actually it was happening and they didn't admit that, so they've come out. I think that this is going to be really black and white legal more so pretty soon. Platforms like Instagram and YouTube with people with sufficient reach have different opportunities to be able to include that through different ways in their social media presence. I think of one crazy example was I'm going to say the name Ken Bone, which most of you won't remember, and that's kind of the point. He was a gentleman who wore a red sweater and had a mustache in the presidential debates. And the next day, iZod asked him, "Hey, you're wearing one of our sweaters. Can you tweet about our sweater?" And because everybody, you're right in the middle of your 15 minutes of fame. He does that, and then the FCC tweets at him because apparently they tweeted people, which was just a scary proposition. And they said, "Hey, you didn't say this was an ad, and legally you need to." And he said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" So he went back and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, that was actually an ad. I was paid to do that." So I think a lot of people sweat this as far as boy, it really undercuts the value of this if people know that this influencer is on our payroll. Well, the answer is they're a collaborator. If you don't treat them like a bought out a shill, and you actually, have them say, yes, I'm part of the team, this event's team, because I'm an ambassador of the event, or I am, consulting on the design of the event. If first off, you should do that, and second of all, if you are doing that and you're transparent about that part, the buy-in is even, stronger. So consider that. Be transparent. Don't try to hide the fact that there's an exchange happening, and also see if you can make that a little bit deeper. So I guess to wrap this up, the two things that I wanted to really talk about the most today, which was influencer marketing and attendee marketing, all are wrapped up under this thing. Be more human. Talk to people how they would like to be talked about, because you understand and you have a deeper knowledge and understanding of the types of people who would attend your event. And then bring in people who, and I'm not even talking like sponsors and other brands. I'm talking about people who command respect because they've earned it, and have them influence both your messaging to reach more people faster, and also the design of your event in order to present in a way that seems as though you made this event just for them. That's it. I don't know if there's any questions, or if you generate. Oh, awesome. Cool.
Thanks so much, Nick. That was fantastic. We did get just a couple questions come in. The first one is, how can you start to build personas when you don't really have any data to show which personas you have attending your event?
Well, that's a great question. So if I would imagine most events capture an email. I'll speak to that really quickly, and then I'll go run down the path of an event that doesn't capture an email, which I guess is possible. If you have an email, then you can have a poll, and if you believe that the poll numbers would come back would be poor, which is most polls, then you can gamify it, or give people stake in it, or something to motivate people, or make it as least amount of questions as possible in order to get some post-event data, which again is always poorer than in the moment data, but it's something. Then you need to have some people dedicated to paying attention at your event itself, and asking people who are consuming the event in different ways. If people seem like they're more introverted, if some people seem like they're in the back of the room, in front of the room, asking a lot of questions, not just behaviors that are as different as possible, and then seeing if you can ask them 5 questions in the moment, that would be great. And then again, if you don't have email, or your event hasn't taken place and you don't have time to do it just then, the next is what a lot of this is, frankly, it's a lot of guesswork. I'd argue that most people who work on the event, specifically the association part, it's even easier. Like they have people in their group that are different enough that they can represent why they're there, be it sponsors or exhibitors or anyone within the event ecosystem itself, and just ask them and say, who do you want more people, who do you want more of the types of people that would mean something to you? And then the last bit is just make some pie in the sky guesses, and then start eliminating the things that aren't true as you get more data over time.
And then the second question that came through, she was just wondering, you had talked about some of the different things you use to find influencers, and she's wondered if you use Crystal Knows.
I haven't, no. There's so many. There's just a ton. If you like ever want to Google influencer procurement or influencer marketing agency, boy, you will find a ton of them. I know that Eventbrite, for instance, uses a group called Scrunch, which was, I had the opportunity to be on the other side of as an influencer, and found that process to be really great, because there was a human element to it, and there was a vetting, and it was very collaborative. It wasn't just like, hey, we have an offer, because I get these too. We have an offer. If you tweet about us 5 times, we'll give you $100. Those are generally passes, I think, like 100% of the time for me. But they came in at like, we have this content. We think it would be pretty valuable for people to get. We think it speaks to the mission that you have. What do you think? And maybe we can come to some sort of agreement on it. And I was like, well, this is great, because already we're we're two people having a conversation. It's mission centric. It's all about win-win, and we collaborated and did it like that. So I found that to be a really great a process on just from someone being on the other side of that. But myself, like I do it for events through polling and social listening. Those are my tools. Now it doesn't scale because I'm one person. I will grant you that. So for a lot of people, that's not somebody like me is not the answer. But I just dedicate a specific amount of time to doing that, and then help the event organizer as an event person. I help more event centric listening.
Excellent. And so thank you to everyone. We're right at the top of the hour now. So thanks again for everyone who joined the webinar today. Thank you to Nick. If you have any follow-up questions or questions that didn't get answered, you can shoot me an email at marketing@hubb.me or connect with Nick on Twitter. And just as a final reminder, the recording and slides have been recorded and will be sent out in a few days. So thanks everyone and have a great day.